In the early we saw a number of municipally owned landfills in the Northeast lease out the landfills to private entities. So there started to become some public-private partnerships and how we're managing our waste because capping and closing these landfills was extremely expensive and is only getting more expensive. So contracting out, letting private entities operate the landfill for a lease payment allowed them to finance the closure of those landfills. Then in the past decade, more than the past decade, last few decades, we saw a lot of vertical integration of waste companies. Companies like the Casellas of the world and waste managements are now not only owning landfills, they have hauling companies, they've bought into recycling operations, they're processing recyclables, they're baling. There's a whole lot more vertical integration in these waste companies than there was 30, 40 years ago. So again, in our area, in the right direction. In our area, again, a lot of the communities, landfills closed, the online landfills turned into transfer stations. And then up in our region, the Moortown landfill was closed, and then in Claremont, New Hampshire, the Wheelwright incinerator closed, which put a considerable amount of waste back on the street looking for a home. So about 250,000 tons of trash back in 2013, all of a sudden has no disposal site. So more disposal sites weren't created. They were just sent to existing disposal sites, which are now speeding up their end of life. So I think it's important to discuss, actually I'm going to back up. Something that people don't realize also with the online landfills is if you look at the location of a lot of landfills, it's interesting as some of you may have been driving here from the north, you pass two landfills on the highway. One is in Hooksett, right after the tolls on the left as you're coming south. Then on the right, just as you're coming into Manchester, is Manchester's old landfill. Both of those landfills are great examples of where landfills were placed historically. And it was way out to the edge of town. We don't want our trash near us, so we put them in places where people weren't living or right on the edge of town. The landfill I manage, if you go too much further south, you'll be in Plainfield. City of Keene, you have to go into the neighboring town to get to their transfer station and bulk landfill. So very often we place our waste as far away from us as we can. And in some cases that's created problems over time. Because some of those places we put them were swamps, wet areas, and other wetland structures in the environment. So over time, what's happened in some of these communities is, they have groundwater contamination associated with these online landfills historically. There was one landfill in New Hampshire that actually was removed. The town of Moultborough excavated and removed their landfill. The decision to do that was largely a political one and based on property values. That there was some adjacent properties that were impacted, so they actually excavated the entire landfill, and I think it now resides somewhere in New York or Pennsylvania, but it was literally shipped out of state. Continues to be monitored, but again, they've worked to clean up that site. So, as I started a moment ago, what has changed? Waste has changed considerably, and I look in this room and I've got to say, I don't recognize as many people as I did probably 5 years ago. So the industry is changing with new people. As Sean mentioned, we've been involved with the association for multiple decades now, and things have changed. People have new ideas on how to manage things, but there's other things that have changed as well. The items we throw away are very different. There's a number of folks who maybe 30 years ago wouldn't have thought bottled water was such a great idea, but now it is. So single-use items are very prevalent. The toxicity of our waste stream is also an issue we don't talk enough about. The toxicity is coming from things lately, like handheld devices or cell phones, tablets. For those of you who have smartwatches, sometimes it's our kids' sneakers that blink. There's mercury in those sneakers, for those who don't realize that. When the kid steps down, it's making an electric connection and turning lights on. And those things end up in the waste stream and contribute to the toxicity of the waste stream. Where we generate our waste has also changed. There was a time when people worked from home, I'm talking pre-COVID, but they worked away from home. It was typically a single income family. Now folks work away from home, dual incomes. So waste is generated away from home. About 30% of our waste is generated someplace else. So it's either at work, we spend a lot of time on leisure, athletic events, movies, things of that nature, but we're away from home. So there's this perceived lack of access to recycling or other diversion options when you're away from home. And that has a huge impact on recycling options. And then how we dispose of our waste has also changed. It's still about 30 to 40% is landfill. No, I'm sorry. Only a third of what we're producing is recycled. But now the way that we're managing our recycling stream has changed. Who here in this room now manages recyclables through single stream or zero sort? Okay, so not a huge number, maybe a quarter of you, but years ago, people would have looked at you cross-eyed, like, what is single stream? What is zero sort? So the way we're managing our recyclables has changed. There's a whole host of new technologies looking at disposal options. There's a facility built in Maine. They were promoting a program called One Bin, where you put everything in one bin, and then they use a series of mechanical processes to separate everything out and convert some of the products that are in that stream into a synthetic fuel product, as well as like a pellet or product for industrial burners. So it's changing the way that we dispose of our waste. So a lot of folks have talked about that we're generating less waste, but there's more of us. And that's a debatable fact also, that some people will say that we're producing less waste, but what doesn't always get considered is the amount of waste that's generated to produce the products that we consume. So if you're using, this shirt or whatever, to produce this shirt generates waste that we just don't think about. The food we eat generates agricultural waste. There's pesticides and other waste associated with the food we consume that we don't always think about. So the amount of waste that's actually produced is going up over time because we're not thinking about those other pieces of the waste stream. We're producing nearly twice what was produced in 1960. Our current national recycling rate is about 35%. Back in 1960, it was around 3%. It's important to also understand just how I think we all have a fairly good grasp on how waste has changed over time, but back in 1960, it was mostly steel and glass. Very, very, very little plastic. So most of our waste was, for lack of a better term, organic in nature. Had very little impact on the environment. The World Bank estimates that high-income countries like the United States, Europe, England, Australia, those countries will increase their disposal needs by 19% in 2050. So we're not producing less, we're producing more. And as I mentioned before, our waste stream is getting more and more nasty. And anybody here who's got to work on a breakaway box or deals with cleaning up the nasty maggots after it's been pulled recognizes just how that waste stream is changing over time. Yes, that's not the word. Yes.
Go next.
Can you go to the next one, please?
Just-
Okay. So what we throw away has changed as well. Probably 20 years ago, I was the recycling coordinator for the state of New Hampshire. And looking at this pie chart, the biggest change is plastics. 15 years ago, that 12% plastics was like 4 or 5%. It was considerably less than what we're doing today. And that's all plastic. It's not just bottles and jars. Paper is kind of leveled off at a third. Again, that's come down. Used to be, between 35 and 40. So the amount of waste and the kind of waste that we're producing has changed over time, which requires us to think about how we're managing that waste going forward. So plastic waste has nearly tripled. There are many grades of plastic. Who here understands plastic recycling? Perfect. Of course you would. Absolutely. So plastic recycling is confusing, which has led to a lot of unfortunate errors in recycling. A lot of vendors end up rejecting loads. There's a lot of contamination in the plastic stream. I'm not suggesting don't recycle plastic. I'm just saying that as this changes, and it's going to, the plastics industry is talking about plastics production going up. It's not going down. And how we manage that recycling stream also needs to change. We have to evolve the way that we're separating out our plastics. The general public needs to have a better understanding of how plastics are recycled and collected, because they don't have a full grasp. Again, the waste toxicity is a big deal. Cell phones, electronic devices, improper disposal of those devices. Then the latest thing is PFAS. That's not really the end of the nasty chemicals. If you look back, we can talk about lead and mercury, those are still problems. And now we've got PFAS, and then whatever PFAS will replace. So for those who don't know PFAS, you might want to. The rules are changing associated with that particular chemical. PFAS is in anything that food doesn't stick to or water can't get through. So raincoats and outdoor clothing contain PFAS. McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's, food wrappers contain PFAS. It's literally in everything, and it's impacting how things are being managed, how people are planning for the future of waste management. How we dispose of our waste, as I mentioned, hasn't changed a whole lot. There's not a lot of new opportunities in New Hampshire. There's things that are being looked at, but for the most part, the majority of our waste is being landfilled. That's just the gist of it. There's a small percentage, between 10 and 15% is incinerated for energy recovery. And then about a third of it is recycled or compost. So nothing really new there. 4.9 pounds per person per day of waste. That's the number that I use. Like I mentioned before, that's a debatable number depending on what you want to use. As far as what's included in that, I try to look at everything for an area that might be disposing of waste. It's interesting to see how different regions actually produce waste differently. There's a number of communities here, particularly in New Hampshire, that have seasonal populations. In off season, maybe you've got 1,000 people, and then in the summertime, you might have 15 or 20,000. So your waste stream changes considerably throughout the year. So that's a long lead into landfilling. We're not going to get into recycling or composting. I'm going to focus on landfilling, and I'm happy to answer questions at the end. In New Hampshire and in the United States, landfilling is the primary method of disposal. As I mentioned before, about half of everything More than half of what we throw away is landfill. It is the least preferred option. If you look at the solid waste hierarchy developed by the EPA and approved by so many others and adopted by a number of communities as far as how they will manage their waste, we're completely upside down as far as how we're managing our waste. It's the easiest thing to do, frankly. It's also the least job producing opportunity. Recycling generates far more jobs than landfilling. So it's also forever. I think there's a number of people I've spoken with who have a misunderstanding about how landfills function. It's not a giant composting bin. Some might snicker at that, but there's a fair number of people who don't understand that landfilling is forever. Put that waste in the ground and there it sits. It's really, it does some decomposition, but for the most part, it's there. And as I mentioned earlier, with our waste stream changing, particularly towards a plastics waste, a plastic type waste, it's not breaking down. Plastic doesn't generally decompose, and it's going to sit there. In New Hampshire, so to point out, this is New Hampshire landfilling. The next item I have on here is a double liner system. So in New Hampshire requires landfills to have what's called a double liner system. As an example, the state of Vermont requires a single liner. Still in compliance with EPA regulations, but New Hampshire has created a double liner system. And a liner system is a very complicated system. I'll get into that a little bit later. But just to understand, there are times when people ask me questions like, why is landfilling so expensive? And I'll touch on some points as to why, but a liner system is part of it. Depth to the water table is another part. Available land is another part. There's a number of issues that in the Northeast impact the value of that airspace. Some folks will go, well, I can go to Ohio for 20 bucks a ton. Why is it so cheap there, or other places in the United States? Because it's a different area. The geology is different, the climate is different, weather patterns are different, soil types are different, the available land is very different. It's completely different. Hard to compare those apples. Modern landfills have a leachate collection system. Leachate is anything, typically precipitation, rain and snow, that passes through waste. And it makes this nasty soup at the bottom, collects it, and ships it out for treatment. There's a very complicated fill sequence. It's kind of like this orchestrated dance to maximize the airspace in that landfill. So it's not just open a hole and throw it in. The cover material we use is very different nowadays too. Each landfill has a permit, and each permit specifies how much cover material is placed on top of the waste. Some of the other pieces that are in modern landfills is active gas collection. It's not just passive venting. Some landfills recirculate their leachate. The reason for that is because it helps to encourage more decomposition and gas production, and helps with settling of waste within the landfill. And then the last piece, there's lots of others in there, but these are the high points, is closure. Eventually the landfill fills up and has to be closed. So when a landfill is proposed to be constructed, it's not just, we're going to dig this hole. Part of the whole thing is you have to show the state what you're building. So you show this hole, I'm paraphrasing, show this big hole, but you also include in that what is known as a closure plan. So you show where you're going to fill to, how big is it going to get. And those fill sequences contribute to that. But the height is sometimes a geometric issue, or it's a physical thing, physics. Waste can't stand straight up. There are certain engineering practices to maximize the waste. The landfill I manage, the height requirement, or the height limitation we have, is based on a sight line that's out of a shopping center north of us. So the public doesn't want to see what we're doing. So to do that, that limits our height. We could go higher, and if you look at our landfill closure plan, it actually gets higher the further we go. So it's this strange line. So when you're looking at landfills and you're wondering, why is it shaped like that? Sometimes it's a local decision. We don't want to look at that, or we want to put a golf course on top of this, or we want baseball fields on top of this, so it changes the way we fill things. That's part of your closure plan. It's part of your future plan. It's just a very crude schematic of what a modern landfill is. So you see there's groundwater monitoring wells. There's actually supposed to be one upstream and one downstream. I don't know of any landfill that just has 2 monitoring wells. There's usually tens or hundreds of monitoring wells depending on the size of the site. So up gradient is supposed to be before the water passes through the landfill, and then down gradient is once the groundwater has passed through the property, to show what does the groundwater look like before your property and what does it look like after. It helps determine leak detection. How's your liner doing? Is anything spilling out? Is there any contamination to the groundwater? For those with capped unlined landfills, I'm sure you have a groundwater monitoring system just to see where are things moving in the groundwater. It's showing a leachate collection system and liner. Many leachate collection systems for municipalities are connected to the local sewer system. So leachate is literally pumped into the city sewer system for treatment. Others truck it long distances. There are some that treat it on site and ship what's left long distances. But it's quite an expense. To show a very basic, that's a passive methane gas recovery system, but it could be connected to a blower to create a vacuum and suck it out, flare it, or produce electricity. This is actually a picture of the Lebanon landfill when the liner was installed in phase 2C. So this is actually the top of the liner that you're looking at. Like, well, that just looks like dirt. Well, beneath it is several feet of other soil products, plastic liners, very thick plastic liners. The cost to construct the line system is about $500,000 an acre. So that's just construction. That's not operational. That's just building it. Okay. It's usually, the liner systems are usually between 2 and 4 feet thick. And it's a series of plastic liners, like I mentioned, drainage material. And very often even that drainage material is a geosynthetic netting. So it's not necessarily stones, but is some sort of plastic product that helps mimic stones. There's other geosynthetics or geotextiles to mimic clay, and a variety of other products, but it's several feet thick to protect the waste from contaminating the groundwater. And then you can't be less than 6 feet from the groundwater. So you dig down really far up in this area. We joke and say New Hampshire grows rocks really well. Well, bedrock's not very deep in some places, and so that means groundwater is not very deep. So it requires some creative engineering, and that's part of the cost. If you have to blast rock, there's a cost for that part of the construction. So it can be quite an expense to site or expand a new landfill. And once it's installed and you start filling it, it requires a special fill sequence to get it going. You're not going to put construction demolition debris in that first couple of feet. You don't want a 2x4 driving itself right down through your liner system. You're going to start with, you might start with mattresses or predominantly bagged waste. They have set aside some of the more difficult waste to protect that liner. So that first several feet of probably 10 or 15 feet of your landfill is going to be typically a bagged waste. This again is part of the liner that you're seeing. This is looking from the east to the west on the property. So we're working the existing active landfill, which is to the right. And then out, as you're looking out there, is actually the Connecticut River. So we're about 200 or 300 feet from the Connecticut River at this site. Some of the interesting things over the years that have happened, even throughout the life of this landfill. So Lebanon lined its first phase in 1989, 1990. Liners were smooth. Now they're textured. That alone has allowed these liner systems to be steeper, because a smooth liner doesn't, soil and other products are sliding off of it. So you couldn't make the this bowl portion very steep. So some of the things that have been done to extend the life of landfills, you never even see. So you go from a slope that might have been a little bit slower type slope is now steeper. So you've added capacity underneath the ground with a textured liner product. Other things that are being done in landfills are called mechanically stabilized earth berms. If you're driving north through Concord on 93, there's a few bridges there where they've used concrete blocks. So your bridge abutments are no longer 100 feet away from the bridge. They're literally right there underneath the guardrail. They're using similar technology in landfills. So instead of having a 3-to-1 slope, now you have this mechanically stabilized earth berm that comes straight up. And so now you've added additional capacity on your landfill by literally filling vertically. So there's a lot of engineering practices that are going on to help improve capacity. Operations. So this is the daily stuff that goes on in a landfill. As I mentioned earlier about landfill construction being expensive, landfill operations are costly as well. Anybody in here who's purchased a piece of equipment, who's had the fortune of being able to purchase a piece of equipment lately, because it's years out to get a piece of equipment delivered. It's typically $250,000 for a load. And our trash compactor that we use to run over the garbage, that's $1 million piece of equipment. We run a waste shredder at our facility. That's an $800,000 piece of equipment. We've got close to $6 million just in rolling stock for the landfill, just in Lebanon. We're small, so it's a very costly endeavor. Diesel fuel, I think the last I saw was a ridiculous $6 per gallon. This equipment is not the most fuel efficient. It's consuming on average 7 to 8 gallons per hour per piece of equipment. So a lot of the newer equipment has anti-idling settings on them, so they'll shut off after sitting idle for a minute or so, but it's still consuming a lot of diesel. We use about 1,000 to 1,200 gallons of diesel fuel a week. And again, we're a small landfill, so anybody else is just exponential going up. Staffing, staffing right now is a huge challenge. We're short-staffed at our facility, and so managing, the waste doesn't slow down when you have fewer people. If somebody calls in sick at your facility, you don't close the gate. You continue to operate the facility. When you're in between hires, it's the same thing. And in fact, since COVID, waste has changed considerably, as I'm sure a lot of you have experienced with home renovations. I'm home at work. I think I'm going to clean out the basement or I'll clean out the barn, and your waste budget has been blown. and you have nothing left in the last 30% of your year because people are cleaning out the closet essentially. So COVID had that weird effect on people as well, not only the labor piece. We move a lot of material at our facility. You know, it's clean dirt, it's wood chips, and a variety of other products that we use. At our facility, we manage our own waste. I just call leachate landfill gas our own byproduct. So our leachate is collected and shipped to the city of Lebanon's wastewater treatment plant. We have a gas system right now that we're flaring. We're in the process of developing an energy facility at our location, and the city of Lebanon will be 100% renewable in the next 18 months. So we're going to offset the city's load from the landfill. So for the next 30 years, we'll know what it's going to cost to run electricity for the city of Lebanon. As I talked about earlier, landfill closure, that is something to consider, or to at least think about when you're throwing things out, that landfills fill up. If you have a contract with a landfill, you should be talking with that contractor and ask them, what's the expected life of your landfill? So as a municipality, you can start thinking, I mean, you're probably doing 10-year CIP projects. Where's your waste going to be in 10 years? Because I'm pretty sure most of you don't have landfills. You're transferring it to some other location. Are you thinking about 10 years out? Again, more changes, equipment's changed. We're using a trash compactor that literally has 2 wheels, comes from Finland. We shred our waste. We didn't do that 10 years ago. Different cover materials we're using. We're getting a tarp system this year, so we won't use soil products. We're gonna roll up tarps and reuse them repeatedly to save capacity. I mentioned engineering changes, and the regulations have changed and will continue to change. The Lebanon facility serves 22 communities in New Hampshire and Vermont. It's approximately 90,000 people served at our facility. Lebanon is the site of both an active and online landfill. We receive about 35,000 tons a year of MSW. Again, we're a very small landfill. That sounds like a lot, but Rochester's, I think, 1.2 million. Casella's 300,000. I think Wheelgrader's 100,000, somewhere in that neighborhood. So on the order of things, we're a pretty small operation. We do compost yard waste and food waste at our facility. We recycle. We require a source separate, residents to source separate. We do not participate in single stream. We have a disposal capacity for another 9 years. I'm planning on 75, and some people think, have asked, how can you plan for 75? It's really a shot in the dark, because what we did 2 decades ago is not what we're doing today. The waste stream has changed. So in 2 or 3 decades, we might be doing some bizarre waste conversion technology that really reduces the volume of our waste considerably. We also manage household hazardous waste, as a lot of you guys do. Universal waste, automotive waste, vegetable oil, tires, Freon, a lot more. This is just the landfill itself. And all those dots are monitoring. This is just a quick graph to show how waste has increased over time. You can see towards the end there, in 2015 is where we maxed out as far as our tonnage, our annual tonnage. This dip in the middle, there was a local solid waste company acquired another solid waste company and brought the trash elsewhere. Shortly after they left, they came back. So it represents a change in the market. Some of the other blips are just economic things. You can see 2019, there's COVID right there. It's dropped way off. So when we budget at our landfill, we don't budget for what our capacity is. We try to look at what our operations are. Some things to think about. I manage a landfill, but I think that we need to think about our waste very differently. And utilizing landfills is not the way to go. It's the least preferred, but it's the most used disposal option. We've changed tremendously over the years. Labor, global markets, people exporting plastics to India, international regulations like plastic is a hazardous waste. Is an international regulation. The equipment, as I mentioned, that has changed tremendously. The waste stream has gotten more toxic, more plastic as well, and lots of new regulations. The solution to today's problems really need to consider future possibilities. We need to think about those and not just how do we extend landfill disposal capacity, but looking at how do we reduce our waste? How do we increase recycling and get stuff out of the disposal stream? Some things that we're looking at are robotics. Right now with the huge labor shortage, there's a huge push in the solid waste industry for robotics. Solid waste collection used to be 2, sometimes 3 men in a truck. Now it's 1, person in a truck. Now it's 1 with 1-armed bandits, or they're grabbing carts. And solid waste companies are telling the customer, this is what we're doing. You're going to need to buy carts for your residents because there's a huge labor shortage. Moving to electrified equipment. There's hybrid heavy equipment out there like loaders that are electric, diesel to reduce fuel. All the tier 5 and other emission controls that are on equipment impacts equipment and maintenance costs. We have to think about these waste conversion technologies that are coming down the line, as well as the ever-changing waste stream. Again, it just continues to get more plastic and more toxic. We need to think about how that's impacting the environment. As I was preparing this presentation, I thought about, anybody know the Mobro? Okay, thanks, John. Some other time, Google Mobro and watch the YouTube video on this. It was a barge that left New York City. It was supposed to go down to North Carolina somewhere in the 80s. And it was a disposal capacity crisis. So it left a community, I think it doesn't matter where it was, you can Google it. Went down to North Carolina. North Carolina decided as it was on its way, never mind, we don't want this. That stuff's too nasty. They tried a bunch of different places, a bunch of different countries. They tried Guatemala, Mexico, back up to Louisiana. Ultimately, the Mobro ended up being disposed of at an incinerator right next door from where it started. Thousands of miles. It's totally worth watching the YouTube video. It's kind of funny, but sad by the same token, because it represents what happens when people panic. Poor planning, and we're kind of in a similar situation where people are, where are we going to put our trash? Where's it going? It's really something to think about. Then last, I got to thinking about what we all do. We all manage other people's wastes. And there's a level of trust that the public puts in us managing their waste. We're not pawing through it to look at their secrets. Very often the public doesn't want us to see what they threw away. They don't want you to know that last night I drank a 30-pack or 2, that I do have a drinking problem. There have been communities that saw an increase in recycling when they went to a cart, because people didn't want to put all their Budweiser cans in an open bin and let their neighbors see just how much they drink. So there is a human side to this. But as stewards of this trash that people are discarding, how will you impact today's waste for tomorrow? How is your community going to plan for tomorrow's waste? Can you reduce your community's waste? I mean, reduce it. I'm not talking about improved recycling. That is great. But are there techniques that you can employ within your community to change the way waste is produced within your community? Can your community develop an environmentally preferred purchasing policy where you're supporting recycled content paper and recycled content? There's recycled content culverts out there different elements of things that you as a community can support the markets your transfer station relies on. But we can all do something. Not looking for answers, but I just wanted to leave everybody with those thoughts that we're not just pushing a compactor button and sending it, but we have an obligation to do something. Thank you.
Marc, if you'd like to.
Can you grab the microphone so that everybody can hear it?
You want me to do the,
Yeah.
hand the mic to the.
Yeah,
All right,
that's
I'll give you a
perfect.
seat here.
Yeah.
Thank you. Can you tell me about the Bethlehem, New Hampshire landfill?
I don't operate it. I'm not, I know of it, but I really can't speak to it.
And isn't the largest landfill?
Oh, the largest landfill in New Hampshire is Rochester, the Rochester landfill operated by Waste Management Incorporated.
Okay, so if our trash goes to a landfill in southwestern New Hampshire, it's most likely going to Rochester.
Not necessarily,
Okay,
not necessarily, because it depends on the rate that your community negotiates with different vendors. There's some communities in southern New Hampshire that landfill up at a landfill in Berlin, Androscoggin Valley. And there are some that are on the seacoast that landfill in Bethlehem, and there's some up north that landfill in Rochester. So it's not always a function of closeness, it's a function of price.
right. We're in Harrisville, New Hampshire,
Okay.
very small, under 1,000 people. And we have a hauler that takes it away. So we really don't know where it goes, but the hauler does, I'm assuming.
Well, yours probably goes to Keene first at a transfer station, then over to Rochester. I'm just suggesting, that may not be.
Okay,
That
all
runs
right,
a lot of
all right, I'll
different-
find out, thank you.
Marc, I got a question for you. During COVID, did you see a big increase in waste coming into the landfill because people weren't going to recycle?
So we are, our facility is the end of the pipe. Okay, and so there are different nuances with all of our communities. The Upper Valley has Dartmouth College, Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center, some other large employers. Dartmouth College shut down, so 5,000 students went home. So all the waste that they produce went home. We lost almost 17% of our tonnage during that time period. So that had a huge impact. When a large employer sends their people home, the average commuter time in the Upper Valley is 45 minutes. So when people went home, they went outside of our service area. So it had a huge impact. People were going out to dinner, they weren't going out to the movies, so we didn't see it. That said, the flip of it, so we not only receive commercial haulers, but we take in residential traffic. Our residential traffic went up 100% in less than 2 weeks and has not stopped since it started. So, and we track that because we're a pay-as-you-throw community, and we've been tracking those units. That because a number of communities around us shut their facility down because of COVID and told them just go to Lebanon. So once they came to our facility, they never went back. So our attendance, our daily trips is an unbelievable number. So it's weird. The trash has gone down, customer counts are up. It's just, it's coming in more vehicles, smaller loads.
Other questions?
I just wondered the future of incinerators.
I think the reality is incineration is, if you look at the hierarchy, incineration is ahead of landfill. Incineration for energy recovery is also, because it's a volume reduced. I think there's a place for it. I'd like to make a recommendation for those who enjoy reading, and if you don't enjoy reading, I'm making the recommendation for you also. The book is called Garbology by Edward Humes. It talks about America's history of waste and the political decisions that have been made associated with incinerators, why they're located where they are, and why they don't exist in as many numbers as they should be, or could be, I should say. It's an interesting read. And I think right now, I think it's Waste News, or there's a magazine out right now that's doing this series on the history of waste in the United States. I can't remember which one it is. It's MSW or.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, Mark. Could you talk a little bit about pay-as-you-throw, the impact on your waste stream, how you feel about property taxes, you know, and tipping fees? It's a topic that a lot of people are thinking about, but they're a little fearful of it, I think.
Sure. So pay-as-you-throw is basically paying per throw of your trash bag. So there's a unit price placed on a bag. For easy math, we'll just say it's $1. Lebanon has had a pay-as-you-throw system since 1972. So it's always been off the taxes. We're an enterprise fund. We're not tax supported at our facility. There are a number of communities in New Hampshire that have pay-as-you-throw systems, but I don't know if they were really presented well. Pay-as-you-throw is a more equitable system. Very often, it results in reducing the amount of waste that's disposed of. Because if you have to pay per bag, all of a sudden you're seeing in real time what the cost is for you to get rid of your garbage. If you're a family and you are going to throw away 5 bags of trash a week, you might think twice about recycling more, because typically recycling is free in a pay-as-you-throw community, and maybe you can save yourself a couple of bucks. So pay-as-you-throw has a big impact on recycling and waste diversion. Sometimes it causes people to leave the system and opt for a different disposal option, which is fine, but it's a more equitable system within your community. It's important to let the public know that the pay-as-you-throw system typically only pays for variable costs. Things like your disposal rate that changes over time. Communities that have unfortunately established these pay-as-you-throw systems and attached everything to it end up failing, because as their waste goes down, then they're scrambling to make, to pay for their programs. People feel, the general public feel as though they're being taxed twice, but all it is using 2 different mechanisms to control the facility costs. The facility and staff have a constant cost, regardless of how much waste goes in. It's an invariable or non-changing type cost structure, only attached to your disposal costs. Pay-as-you-throw rate.
And UNH did a study a few years ago, and we found that towns that had pay-as-you-throw at the time, this was maybe 2015, had about 1/4 to 1/3 less waste per capita than towns that didn't. But where did the waste go? Was it all recycled? Was it mattresses and remaining? So you do have to wonder about that question. But it has shown some pretty good sensitivity to, the amount of trash people produce is a lot more sensitive to the price than was originally thought.
But right now, what some communities are finding, there's been a few communities I spoke with that their recycling rates are going down and their disposal is going up because they haven't adjusted their bag price over time. And right now, people's leisure time is so valuable. To go to a transfer station and spend 20 minutes sorting, people are opting to just, it's my choice, I'm gonna throw everything in the bag and heave it because my time is more valuable than the price of a bag of trash.
And they paid for it.
Right,
So-
it's out of their pocket, it's my decision. I'm gonna go watch my kid play soccer. I'm not gonna sit here and sort my plastic. So just be mindful of those changes over time as well.
Yeah, it's worth,
Good morning. I apologize if I missed this in the beginning. Could you talk a little bit about the construction and demolition waste? Do you have any programs either for commercial entities or residents in line?
Sure. So in Lebanon, about 3 years ago, we passed a city ordinance banning C&D from disposal in our landfill. And that was to preserve capacity. I should specify it's unprocessed C&D. Because what we do is we do separate out construction demolition debris. We grind it up on site to meet a cover material spec, and then we use it as a cover material. So we're taking waste out of the waste stream and using it as a cover material. So it's preserving airspace. That's how we manage C&D.
Other questions?
One word, glass. What are you doing? You're not taking it right now.
We do.
Glass?
So we do manage glass. We have been an aggregation site for the NRA glass program that we've had to hit the pause button on because of staffing shortages at our facility. We can't manage another material. So because we own and operate our landfill, we're not landfilling the glass. We're beneficially reusing it in the landfill. So if I need drainage in the landfill, I'm using glass, not precious metals. If we need it around gas pipes or gas collection or leachate collection pipes, we're using glass. So we're using it as a construction aggregate.
It's a trash shredder.
So the vendor is actually here. Simplicity Engineering is the vendor that we got the machine from. It's called a CompTech Terminator. It shreds. It's not like a Beaver kind of brush chipper. It's a low speed, high torque machine. It'll process about 40 tons an hour. And all we're doing is making the waste size smaller. And in doing so, you can add 20% disposal capacity to your facility because you get things called bridging. You get a couch, and then you got all these bags of garbage underneath it or another couch, and so by shredding it, you eliminate the bridging. Plus, we shred our C&D with it. Depending on tire markets, we'll shred tires.
Same machine.
Same machine. We shred everything. Railroad ties. We've tried scrap metal. Tried a lot of, just to see what it would do, and it'll go through anything. It's an impressive machine.
The leachate, are you tracking it from Lebanon to your wastewater treatment plant?
Yes.
So you're not pumping it anymore to the pump station?
No, we pump it in through the city of Lebanon, but we have from different cells, we have flow meters, and we have a flow meter when it leaves the facility. So we know which cell is producing how much and ultimately how much, because we get billed. So we are the city of Lebanon, but we pay sewer bill too. So there was one thing that I put on my notes that I just wanted to talk about really quickly. I know a lot of you are transfer stations. Any opportunity I have to talk about fires at landfills, I'm going to do that. Please make sure that you have opportunities for residents to manage handheld devices and lithium-ion batteries. There's a lot of energy left in those devices and batteries. In 1 year, we had over 12 fires in the landfill. It takes very little to set those things on fire. We literally drove over a device and they catch fire. And as you can imagine, the waste is full of paper and other nasty things, and it catches fire very quickly. So if there's something that you can do at your local facility to encourage more recycling or diversion, absolutely. These batteries are fantastic and end up, there's recycling markets for them and can reduce the use of other batteries. So they're great things. We just need to make sure we're managing them properly.
Sorry, I just have a question. Is there an active incinerator in New Hampshire now? Okay, where is it?
Pennacook.
Pentecost, okay, and if, okay, that's fine.
And I think there's one municipal, but I'm not, I think there's two, but there's one in Pentecost that manages multiple towns.
Okay, and you think who where the second one would be?
I think it's Bridgewater Hebron.
Bridgewater where?
Bridgewater Hebron facility, I
Okay,
think up around Ashland, that.
Okay. thank you.
Any last questions? Thank you all for coming, and we invite you to head next door to the, there's some coffee and perusing to be done.
So you're gonna set this up to connect with that.
No, actually, I'm getting sand. Okay, so I want to stop recording. How do I do that? So I got it.